cash flow from sale of a property. Here's where we left off. We have the total cash flow from operations. Now we need the cash flows from the eventual sale, and with that, we'll be able to calculate the total cash flow for this investment. And this assumes that we're buying the property all cash. We'll take care of financing a deal down the road. So what's the best way to calculate that sale in year 3? There's no hard and fast rule, but ultimately, you want to try to come up with something realistic. So what's a decent way to find out what other people might pay for the property? Comps. Comps reflect what other people paid for other properties. And if you bought one, you have your own comp that you know intimately about. But ultimately, eventual sale is about what someone else is willing to pay you in 3 years. Regardless of how you approach estimating the sales price in year 3, just do your best to try to make it as realistic as possible. In the analyses in this video, I'm going to use a cap rate to value the property. I'm going to take some comps, extrapolate the cap rate from those deals, and I'm going to use that cap rate to value my property and what I think it's going to be worth in 3 years. And I'll show you how I do that, but feel free to use price per unit if that's common in your market, gross rent multiplier if that's common in your market. While those other two methods scare me a little bit, that very well may be what happens in your market. But I think cap rate is a more conservative measure. So how do you calculate the sale price with a cap rate? Well, you take the net operating income and divide it by the cap rate. By net operating income, I mean the net operating income in the year you sell it, and dividing it by a cap rate. But how do you get the cap rate? Well, you go and look at comps, and you take the NOI from when they bought the property, divide it by the sale price, and that's how you get your cap rate comp. And that results in your cap rate, and that becomes one of the comps you're going to use. The two equations you see before you are the exact same equation, just reconfigured with algebra. I'm not going to ask you to do algebra, but if you have two of these three things, you can calculate the other thing. And just for completeness, here's how you calculate NOI if you have cap rate and sale price. We're not going to do that, but I just wanted to show this to you to be complete. So in order to calculate our sale price, we need to have a cap rate. Utilizing comps in our market, Comp A had an NOI of $20,000 when it sold, and the purchase price was $250,000. Divide those two numbers, and you get an 8% cap rate. If you did the math, you probably got 0.08. Remember, there are some decimal place changes when you switch from a number to a percent. So Comp A has an 8% cap rate. Looking at another comp, Comp B, we have an NOI of $25,000 and a purchase price of $350,000. Divide those two, and we get a 7.1% cap rate. Now let's say we analyzed 2 or 3 other ones, and we came up with some similar values. So based on the average of these values, it's safe to say that the average is approximately 7.5%. And that's the cap rate we're going to use as we value the sale price in year 3. Looking back at the work we did in the previous videos, we worked really hard to calculate the net operating income, which coincidentally is the same as the cash flow from operations at this point. I kept cash flow in here just to bring to your attention the fact that cash flow and net operating income are different. Even though they are the same number here, they represent different things. So what we want is the net operating income. So if we take the net operating income in year 3, which is $31,145, we divide that by the 7.5% cap rate that we got from our comps, and we get a sale price of $415,267. That's how you value a property using a cap rate. Now in this scenario, we are assuming an all-cash purchase, which means we don't have a loan, which means we don't have to pay back any loan balance. So this is almost what we walk away with. Remember, when you have a sale, there will be some other costs, like brokerage fees, transfer taxes, notary fees, legal fees, and maybe even some capital gains, which I must say is outside the scope of this video. Talk to your accountant about capital gains. So we need to make an assumption on what those costs will be. So for this one, I assume sales costs of 8%. That includes 6% for brokerage fees, 1% for transfer taxes, because in this market, transfer taxes are actually 2%, but they're split evenly between buyer and seller. So the buyer pays 1% and the seller pays 1%. These customs may be different in your market. And then I threw in some fluff of another 1% to cover notary fees and things like that. So after you subtract that 8% out, you're left with total proceeds, or total cash flow from sale, of $382,046. Now our template here is complete. We have our cash flow from operations, cash flow from eventual sale, and now we can add it all together to get the total cash flow for an unleveraged deal. Or in other words, a deal we paid all cash for and don't have any loans. After we go through this process in the inaction portion, we're actually going to go and figure out how much we're going to pay for this future income. We don't know what that number is right now, but based on the return we want, we're going to calculate the maximum amount we can pay and still walk away with that return. We did a lot of work to get to this point, and things are going to start to get really exciting here in a moment.